A German mine hides decades of leaking radioactive waste. Northeastern France is still crawling with unexploded World War I shells, and an Irish castle has a sealed room that an exorcist was found dead inside, his arms stretched out, his face contorted in terror. These are prohibited areas in Europe no human can enter. Asse II Mine is a massive salt mine in Germany, dug more than 2,500 feet underground. It was turned into a dumping ground for radioactive waste. There are over 125,000 barrels of low-level nuclear waste and another 12,000 plus containers of medium-level stuff, all stacked in there between the late 60s and 70s. And they weren't stored carefully in reinforced vaults. Workers just rolled barrels down and then buried them in layers of salt, even though the containers were never built to last long term. In a salty, wet environment, well, that means they've been rusting and leaking for decades. The mine holds arsenic, mercury, lead, animal carcasses from radiation experiments, and some say even human remains are buried down there. Some of it might go back to World War II era research projects, but details are kinda sketchy on that part. But to make it worse, the mine is collapsing. The salt layers are shifting about 15 centimeters a year, and water has been seeping in through dozens of breaches. So if the whole place floods, all that radioactive material can seep into the groundwater. German authorities now say the waste has to be dug back out using remote-controlled robots, but that won't even start until 2033, and it could drag on for decades. If you think abandoned battlefields are just empty fields, well, think again. Northeastern France has an area called the Zone Rouge, or Red Zone. After World War I, the land was left in ruins. Entire towns were destroyed, fields were churned into mud and craters, forests were ripped apart. Some villages were never rebuilt. All these years later, the land is still dangerous and off limits. The main reason is unexploded shells. There are tons of them, including gas shells, grenades, rusted ammunition, all buried under the soil. On top of that, the ground is poisoned with arsenic, lead, and mercury from the old munitions and the chemical weapons. Even nature hasn't fully reclaimed the area yet. The land is just too toxic and too unstable. Next, let's head to a haunted, abandoned castle in Ireland. Carrigaholt Castle was built in 1480 by the McMahons, the last Gaelic chiefs of the area. 5 stories tall with thick stone walls and a spiral staircase to the roof, built more for battle than comfort. Above the gate there are holes, openings where defenders could pour boiling water, hot oil, or just shoot arrows straight down on anyone trying to get in. Not exactly a welcoming entrance. The castle's history is brutal too. In 1588, 7 ships of the Spanish Armada anchored nearby, asking for help. Legend says the McMahons lured some of the Spanish sailors into the castle under false pretenses, killed them, and just stole all their gold. Then they buried the treasure on the beach. A year later, English forces arrived to take control of the area. After a couple battles, the English tricked the family into surrendering. The McMahons were promised safe passage if they surrendered, but when they opened the gates, every last one of them was executed. There were more battles in the years that followed, but eventually the place was abandoned. Now, the whole castle is said to be haunted, no surprise there, but there's one room that was completely sealed off. In the 20s, an exorcist went in to deal with whatever dark spirit was supposedly inside and was found dead the next morning, hands outstretched in terror. So the room was sealed up again, and nobody's dared enter it since. On November 14th, 1963, a fishing boat crew spotted what they thought was smoke from a burning ship off Iceland's southern coast. When they got closer, though, they realized it wasn't smoke at all. It was a volcanic eruption breaking through the sea. Over the next 3.5 years, molten rock piled up until a brand new island stood where there had only been open water before. The eruption was so intense that it hurled ash 10 kilometers into the sky and blasted rocks over half a mile from the crater. French journalists tried to claim the island for France at one point, but Iceland quickly put that to rest. They named it Surtsey, after Surtur, the fire giant from Norse mythology, who was said to bring about the end of the world. And I'm glad that Iceland got it, because that's a pretty cool thing to name it after. It just fits. Today, Surtsey is completely off limits though. Only a handful of scientists are allowed to land there, and that's because the island has become one of the world's most important natural laboratories. Since no one lives there, it's this rare chance to watch life form on this barren piece of land completely from scratch. Moss, insects, birds, and seals have slowly started making it their home. You won't find Poveglia Island on any tourist map of Italy. For hundreds of years, this was where Venice sent the sick to die. When plague ships came into the lagoon, passengers who showed symptoms were just dumped on Poveglia. The same went for locals. If you had the plague, you were dragged here and just left to rot. Mass graves were dug and bodies were burned in huge piles. National Geographic has estimated that more than 100,000 people ended up in Poveglia's plague pits, which makes the actual soil this creepy mix of earth and human ash. In the 20th century, the old quarantine buildings were converted into a psychiatric hospital. One story goes that a doctor there performed brutal experiments on patients, like lobotomies using crude tools. Supposedly, he eventually threw himself from the bell tower after being driven mad by the spirits of those who died on the island. That bell tower is still there, its silhouette one of the only things visible from the water. After the hospital closed in 1968, Poveglia was abandoned. For decades, no one was allowed in without very special permission. Fishermen even avoided casting their nets near it, afraid they'd pull up human bones. Ghost hunters call it one of the most haunted places in the world. Built into the mountains on the border between Croatia and Bosnia, there's a place called Željava Air Base. When it was built in the 60s, it was one of the largest underground military complexes in Europe. The base had 5 runways and could house dozens of fighter jets inside its tunnels. The entire underground section was designed to survive a direct nuclear strike, which gives you an idea of how paranoid things were back then. But after the Yugoslav wars in the early 90s, the place was abandoned, but it didn't go quietly. The army packed the place with explosives and blew most of it to pieces, leaving behind miles of ruined tunnels and a toxic mix of asbestos and jet fuel residue. To make things even worse, the area around it is still littered with landmines. One wrong step and boom. Moffen Island is a tiny speck of land way up in the Svalbard archipelago in Norway. It's mostly ice and gravel, and it's completely uninhabited, by humans, that is. You're not allowed to go anywhere near it. The whole place is a strict wildlife sanctuary, mostly for walruses and seabirds. Walruses haul out on the ice and beaches, and even small disturbances can stress them out and make them stampede, which can be deadly for the younger ones. Scientists are allowed on the island sometimes to study the animals, but only with special permits. Everyone else, keep your distance. The island is basically flat, covered in snow and ice for most of the year, and it's almost got no vegetation, so I don't know why you'd want to go there anyway. Been on maps since the 1600s, but humans have never settled it because it's small, very exposed, and it's brutally cold, even in the summer. Well, we couldn't get through a list like this without talking about the Paris Catacombs, a massive underground grave holding over 6 million people. Yes, tourists can visit here, but only certain areas. A lot of it is completely off limits, as it's very easy to get lost. In the late 18th century, the city's cemeteries were overflowing. The most notorious was Les Innocents, a cemetery that had been used for hundreds of years. By the 1700s, it was basically a mound of dead, with bodies stacked and packed everywhere. When basement walls started collapsing under the weight, it was decided to move the bones into the tunnels below the city. Starting in 1786, nightly processions of wagons carried remains from cemeteries all over Paris to the ossuary. Over time, the walls of the tunnels were full of bones. Skulls and femurs were stacked up. It was very practical. It also turned the tunnels into this macabre art piece. People have gotten lost exploring the tunnels, most famously a hospital worker named Philibert Aspert, who wandered in 1793. He lost his light, and he got turned around and just couldn't find his way out. His body wasn't found until 1804. Turned out he wasn't even that deep in. It was just a few meters from a staircase where he could have escaped from. That's how hard it is to navigate this place. Gyaros is one of the most notorious hell islands in Greek history. It's tiny, barren, and completely uninhabited. There aren't even any trees. It's just this harsh, rocky terrain. Back in the early Roman Empire, it already had a reputation for being unbearable. Writers like Tacitus and Juvenal described it as a place so harsh, so devoid of even the basics for living, that Tiberius refused to exile people there. In the 20th century, people were kind of exiled here. Gyaros became a prison island. During and after the Greek Civil War, roughly 22,000 people were sent there for their political beliefs. The island was later used as a detention site from 1967 to 74. Today, the island is strictly off limits, but the prison ruins are still standing. And the final entry on the list has to be the Vatican's secret archives. Not only is this one of the most off-limits places in Europe, it's one of the most prohibited places in the world. A massive ancient library of documents the public isn't allowed to see. And when I say massive, I mean over 53 miles of shelves holding millions of letters, manuscripts, and official church records stretching back more than 1,000 years. treasures. People love to speculate about what's inside. Some say the archives actually hold proof of alien encounters, lost gospels, letters from famous historical figures that are so controversial they had to be hidden away. Who knows what's really down there, but it's safe to say there are probably documents about excommunications, heresies, and trial records of supposed witches and conspiracies that the church wanted to keep under wraps. All that said though, I've been your host James, and I'll catch you, yes you specifically, next time.